You are a kid who considers himself normal, but the truth is that you are not normal, since deep down you were chosen to save the planet by kissing the enemies. Wait, how, by the way, if you want to know the name of the anime during the video, it will appear below. Just leave the minute in which it appears, and you will win a heart. The anime begins by introducing us to our protagonist named Itsuki, who is waking up Los Madrazos for his younger sister named Katori. The truth is that neither the protagonist nor anyone in the world likes to be woken up like that, so the kid decides to tell his sister that he will infect her with his flu if he doesn't leave her alone. And well, yes, that was how he managed to get rid of it. After this, the kid continued bothering his sister with the one in the flu, since there is a very contagious virus that is spreading in Japan, but nothing, the protagonist is not infected with that virus. He only says that to annoy his sister in revenge for having woken him up at Los Madrazos. Later, the kid went to his school where he starts to talk to one of her classmates, and that's when a girl enters the scene that greets the protagonist, although he doesn't know her, and it turns out that this girl called Origami made a genius. She is the smartest in the class, and one of the most popular of the school, but hey, as far as the protagonist is concerned, the girl, it's kind of weird since he greeted them without knowing him, and for a while he stared at him. For no apparent reason, in one of those there was an earthquake. But since earthquakes are very common in Japan, we see that the anime characters do not even flinch, they simply abide by the protocol for those cases, being that the shelter is already everywhere so that people can be safe from earthquakes. From there we see the protagonist enter one of the shelters where she calls her sister to find out if she was able to get into a shelter as well, but not when she looked for her on the GPS. She realized that this was not the case, so she decided to go out to look for her. And the problem is that there was an explosion in front of her, where we also see that there is a girl with a sword. This girl with a sword, when she saw him, she wanted to crack it since she thought that he had gone to kill her, but nothing. The protagonist says that he does not even know who she is. And that's when other girls arrive to face them in duels of powers, being that one of those girls that is facing the one with the sword is nothing more and nothing less than Origami, the intelligent one in the room. And of course the protagonist does not understand and why a classmate is now wearing a suit and launching powers, but hey, the fact is that in a clash of powers the protagonist ended up being hit by the shock wave, and in the next scene we see him waking up in a ship while being treated by a nurse. To this, the first thing the protagonist does is ask by his sister, but well, it turns out that his sister is the one in charge of that ship, because there we see controlling the screens of the place, and informing the protagonist that the sword girl that caused the explosion is a spirit whose purpose is to cause chaos on Earth, and the girls that arrive to face her, they are members of the Japanese Defense Force against spirits that are basically in charge of eliminating the spirits. And right there, Kotor informs his brother that there is another method to face the spirits, and that only the protagonist is capable of doing it, so for that they will give him training. Obviously the protagonist does not understand and a read of what they are telling him, and he understands less when he realizes that the ship they are on is kilometers high from where he lives. But hey, just the same, that his sister did not explain much to him, and they sent him back to class. It was only after the classes were determined that the protagonist met with his sister again, and she explained to him that the method that only he can use to contain the spirits, it is inviting them to dates, making them have a good time so they don't feel like destroying the world, and finally the kid will have to kiss them to seal their powers so good, with the intention of making it a great match for the spirits. They started a training that consists of putting an earphone in the ear to give him instructions on how to flirt. That's why we see him trying to conquer his teacher while they give instructions to his ear, and that is that yes, people, not looking for another girl, it had to be the teacher. But well, the protagonist began to apply his charms, with which he ended up falling in love with her. So to get out of the mess, he preferred to run away, because his teacher was already planning the wedding there. While he was going up, he ran into Origami, whom his sister asked him to try to conquer as well. So the protagonist started with his lyrical being that they were turning out, even though this girl is hard to conquer, and things were progressing, but in that the evil spirit L ended again, so they gave the protagonist the mission of conquering her once and for all, to prevent her from ending the school. This is how the kid went to the place where the spirit was, but when she saw him, the first thing she did was send him a few attacks to the point where he was ready to finish it. But then the girl remembered that the protagonist was present at the incident on his fight last time, so he asked why he is chasing her, to which the protagonist clarifies that he is not his enemy, that he just wants to meet her, and blah 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 blah. The protagonist began to to express his little speeches dictated by the base of operations with which he managed to make the spirit lower its guard, and accept the help of the protagonist with the excuse that he would use it as a guide to get to know the L and a little better. In one of those, the protagonist asked the water and its name, however, he told her that he had no name, so he gave the protagonist the freedom to choose one with this at the base of operations. They went crazy looking for a pretty name for the girl, but in the confusion they ended up choosing a very ugly one that she didn't like, and because of that he was about to crack the protagonist since he thought he was making fun of her, but before they blow his head off he asks to correct the name, baptizing the girl as he plays, and well, this name if he liked the spirit. However, when it seemed that everything would be peace, the spirit hunters arrived to shoot him, with which from the base of operations they considered that this was the right moment for the GDP to invite the web to an appointment, since in fact he lives invited her. The problem is who touches does not know that it is a date, and before the protagonist could explain, Origami came to ST, and between the kid and touches, but on this occasion Origami ended up taking the worst part, being that after they took her to the hospital we see appear to he touches to tell the protagonist that he will finally accept the date of the kid from there, who told him that to go out without raising suspicions it is better that she change her clothes, so he showed her a photo of the school uniform which she was able to replicate without problems, and now she looks like one more student. During the date, the protagonist began to eat bread since she reacted as if she had tried something from another world, which is good for her case, since she comes from another world. When she tries human food, she is surprised, and she is quite enthusiastic, and that she has not approved the rice with egg that I make. Later the kid took her to a restaurant where the waitress it turns out to be her sister, who of course is conspiring so that the girl falls in love with the protagonist, and that is why it is. What does a madrazo give him when he notices that the kid can date him from there? In addition, when the protector left the restaurant, the protagonist's sister invented some fairs for you to play. They will continue to have fun, and the intention of the tremendous sister was to make the date end in a super romantic environment to finalize the kiss, and something else. But not the protagonist noticed this, and decided better to take her to a shopping center where he put her to play with the little machines that catch things so that she could try to catch a piece of bread, and although at first the girl was super frustrated because the bread always fell, in the end she was able to capture a very large one. Being that with this last attraction the appointment between Taka and the protagonist culminated, where we see Taka super excited for having realized that the planet Earth it is not as bad as she thought, and well, because of this, she says that her planet will return, and it will not return anymore, because every time it returns, it ends up causing some natural disaster, be it earthquakes, tsunamis or tornadoes. So since she grew fond of the Earth, she says that he will leave, and will not return so as not to harm him. To this the protagonist says that he agrees that she leave forever, so instead he proposes that she stay forever, that she lives with him, and that way she will not have to worry about damaging the planet when leaving it. And well, the girl thinks it's a good idea. However, she considers that her enemies from that world will not agree at all, and it is precisely when the girl said this that we see Origami pointing at her and releasing her a bullet that if it weren't for the fact that the main character made Taka bend over, they would go through her. But well, instead, the one who took the bullet was the main character himself, that he will avenge the kid's death. But hey, there after a while they revived the protagonist, so when he saw it he hugged him, and forgot to destroy the Earth. The problem is that before seeing the protagonist he had activated his evil sword, and now he lost control of for her, to seal her powers once and for all, and prevent the sword from exploding. The protagonist had to resort to a kiss. Sometime later, the kid suddenly fell down. He wanted to help her, but the girl left this scene, but I included it because this character will be relevant later. The fact is that in relation to touching, she finally decided to stay on Earth. She joined society as another student from the school, where we see that he went to offer cookies to the protagonist because he has been super spoiled. And in that Origami arrives to apologize to the girl for having tried to kill her, only she did not know that she had become good, and although they made peace, they still did not fall well. So they are competing to see who makes the best cookies, and the detail is that the judge is in who doesn't play it, and doesn't say who cooks the best cookies. Later we see the same arrive at his house to take a bath, and in that he realizes that Taka was in the shower, so they gave him his madrazo. And after this the boy went to ask his sister in his right, and whose name is Rainer, why Taka is now living with them. They told him that as he concealed his spiritual powers by kissing her. Basically, he has to be together to prevent the girl from recovering those powers, and that's partly why they want the kid to pamper her for that, and because they want the protagonist to continue training on how to please a spirit, because the intention it is that the kid manages to seal more spirits in the future, but the protagonist does not agree that they have made you play move into the house, since that was heard by the playmaker herself, who was saddened to see that the kid is uncomfortable his presence, but to see the protagonist is not that he opposes that he plays live there, and what he meant is that they should have warned him, or consulted about what plays he was going to move, because he opened the bathroom door without knowing that the girl was going to being there naked. Even after a while he goes to fix the bathroom, and he finds her again, being that she gave him a madrazo with the toilet paper, and finally the relationship between the protagonist and he plays is going through a tense situation, but I'll tell you, after a while they are happy. Sometime later we see them both at the school where Origami seeks to sit with the main character, which causes her, but hey, we already know that they are competing in one of those. The anti-disaster alarm goes off, so the protocol begins of protection. That before this the protagonist went to his sister's ship to see what spirit it is now, and well, there he realizes that it is from the blue-haired girl that he saw walking in the rain the day before. That is why he asks his sister to give him the opportunity to save her, so KOTOR gives him permission, and that's why we see the protagonist prepare to go out to look for her, but in that he achieves that the girl sneaked into the station, where instead of talking, she does talk to his puppet, who says that he remembers the protagonist from last time, and that he seems like a good guy there for once, and takes advantage of introducing himself as Yashinan, but I am going to say Yoshi, to which the protagonist without wasting much time invites him to a he sites. The detail is that that's when he appeared. When he saw that the protagonist was flirting with others, he got upset and took Yoshi's puppet. The problem is that because of this, Yoshi is now the one who got upset, so a giant mouse with that caused rampage in the building, and with whom she ended up running away from the place. Sometime later, we see that she is still jealous for having seen the protagonist with another, so she even went to have a psychological talk with Reiner to see if it is normal for her to be a spirit feel them for seeing the main character with another, and who meanwhile the kid got precisely the other one who was desperately looking for her puppet, and since she couldn't get it the main character decided to help her, but during the search Yoshi's stomach rumbled, so the kid gave it to him. He took her home to feed him. While there Yoshi began to tell the protagonist that he misses his puppet a lot. It turns out that the girl considers the puppet a superhero who defends her when she is in danger, but not although the protagonist tells her that he will help her to get her puppet. He also tells her that it is not necessary for the puppet to be her hero, because that is why he is there to defend her against any danger, and there when he was going to kiss her, he entered the room, so Yoshi decided to leave before start another fight. And it's time she went to her room suspicious to take out her rage with the pillow. Later the protagonist went to look for Yoshi's puppet, but who he ended up finding was Origami, who suddenly, and for no reason, got hot, and at the same time while the protagonist takes the opportunity to ask her not to hurt Yoshi since she is harmless, but well, Origami says that as long as I do have powers his duty is to try to kill her, since later we see Origami together with a fellow hunter trying to kill Yoshi, being that to defend herself she had to summon her giant rat with which she intended to escape the conflict again, but in that the nosy of the protagonist caught Yoshi's attention, being that to defend her the mouse pointed an attack at her, which was seen by It's Up, who wanted to recover his powers to defend the protagonist, and on the 5th attempt he was finally able to invoke a barrier to prevent the protagonist from making it into mush. This is how, after seeing that the girl has recovered his powers, the portal asks him to please help Yoshi, but of course, because Taka has recovered his origami powers, he is trying to kill her too, and on the other, and the protagonist took advantage of the fact that Origami was distracted by Taka to go to Yoshi to give him his puppet, being that once and for all, he took the opportunity to kiss Yoshi, the girl managing to seal her powers with this. The next day, we see that all the characters in the series suddenly wanted to go on vacation in the hot springs because the workers of the army of spirit hunters planned it that way, and the protagonist and his people are already in a car on the way to the same hot springs. However, he still hasn't gotten used to having to share the protagonist with Yoshi, so in one of those he threw a tantrum kicking the car, and due to his great strength they ended sinking all those who were on board. So after a while we see that they had to continue the journey walking since the car broke down for the reed. And naturally it's time to go sad because she knows that she is to blame For that reason the protagonist has to go to comfort her so that he stops feeling bad, and in that we see that behind his back a strange cylinder came out which turns out to be being controlled by the army who are spying on the movement of the spirits so that in the event that it becomes violent they can be neutralized. But hey, by itself, most of the spirit hunters were on their way to the hot springs, but how various obstacles were achieved. They had to use their powers, being that in one of those they found some traps that activated some missiles to the point where one of them they impacted the place where the main character was with his girls, and precisely the Yoshi puppet flew off. That is, I don't know what happens with that puppet, but it gets lost very easily, and of course this made Yoshi begin to bellow to the point where he activated one of his powers, managing to freeze the entire floor there, that to avoid a major disaster. The protagonist ran out to look for the puppet guy. The problem is that when he found him, a gigantic ball of power impacted the place where he was. The good thing is that he arrived just in time to cover it with a barrier, because if it hadn't been for that the kid would have been torn to shreds. The fact is that after this the kid and his girls were able to reach the waters just like the spirit hunters did. The next day we see that they are presenting in the army of spirit hunters to a blue-haired second lieutenant called Manada Camilla, who is said to be a tough fighter, but well, it remains to be seen if the results live up to expectations. Not only in the army are new characters being added in the school, also for that's why we see a new white arrive who introduces herself as a talkie, but since her name is very long I'm going to call her talking, being that after saying her name in front of the whole class the very based one confesses to everyone that she is a spirit. Yes people, our girl does not feel any shame in presenting himself in front of the class as a spirit, and after this he goes directly to the table of the prota to ask him to be the one to teach him the school, and of course since the main character is the spirit tamer, he agrees to be the one who teaches him the school for the spirit, a newcomer that, as we know, the goal of the protagonist is to win his heart to seal his powers, and prevent him from causing harm to the planet. That's why his sister begins to give him advice as usual, so that he can take advantage of the tour that he is giving him as if it were a date. That's why we see that the protagonist invited the girl to the cafeteria, because in addition to showing it to him for the first time, he will have the opportunity to make a romantic encounter. But nothing, that is, this girl does not need to be the protagonist of the conquest. It shows that she is then one who wants to conquer the protagonist, because in addition to the fact that she was the one who looked for him for the first time asking him to teach her school, we also see the girl with a rather flirtatious attitude, to the point where the fault was raised to teach him, to the main character, what is underneath. Naturally the kid got very nervous, since they are in the middle of the school, so I touched and stopped and his morbid advances, but right there he confessed to the main character that he is interested in him, and when he was about to tell him the reason, and ask him for an intimate favor, the other two girls of the protagonist fall, who of course were snooping on the protagonist to see what he and Taki were talking about, and of course since both girls are jealous they decided to stay with the protagonist to accompany him on the tour, and for this reason they did not. The protagonist could not confess the reason why he loves him or ask him for that intimate favor that he wanted. However, when he says goodbye he whispers in his ear that he hopes they spend time alone. After this the girl walks away happy for having had that first approach with the protagonist, and in that he runs into some guys who want to rat the girl to do dirty things with them, and well the iPhone is not opposed to this, so he invites them to an alley. The detail is that while in there it was Touch who ate the 3 kids, and after this man appeared who we remember is the new second lieutenant of the army, and now she seeks to face Toki for what he did on the other side. While the protector Kaban on the way home the protagonist meets on the road precisely with man who turns out to be the protagonist's sister. And yes, people, the protagonist has another younger sister apart from Kotori who turns out to be bad, and she tells us that she was separated from the protagonist when she was very little, however, thanks to some vague memories and the necklace that she always carried with her, never she forgot that the protagonist was her brother, and now that she is very happy to meet him again. However, the one who is not very happy is Kotori, who since she was adopted, never knew Mana, and well, now she is a little jealous because she thinks that man is going to remove that. Before this Mana says that she is more the sister of the protagonist since her ties are by blood unlike Kotori who is adopted, which naturally made Kotori upset, and they began to argue to see who else is the sister of the protagonist, if adopted who grew up with him or the blood sister who left when she was little. Being that to resolve the endless debate they asked the protagonist to choose which is better, the adoptive sister or the blood sister. But of course the protagonist did not want to answer such a question anymore, that regardless of the answer, he was going to end up hurting one of his sisters. The next day we see the calmest protagonist in classes where the teacher is passing attendance, and when they named Toki, it turns out that White was a spirit. She had not reached which Origami said that she has information that Tokio would never go to school again, but shortly after it turned out that Doki appeared, leaving Origami very shocked, since she had information that Toki would never go to school again. And the reason why Origami thought this is because she knew that her partner from the army Mana had killed who that fight in the alleyway. However, the fact that now Tokio turned up alive is super strange, and from there also that Origami went to confront Toki to see if it was a ghost. Oh what the, but there is no touch. He recognized Origami as a member of the army, so he neutralized her in time with some ghostly ends, while telling him that his plan was to stay with the protagonist, who for his part already found out about the strange event of Toki. However, his sister asked him that even if the matter of the waifu continuing to live was very cloudy, the plan is still for the protagonist to conquer her. That is why they gave him the order to invite her to a date, and that is why the kid complied with that order by inviting Tokio to a date. But before that date the protagonist went home with a touch, being that she got the shrink suddenly turned off the light, unbuttoned her blouse, and began to crawl romantically. Achieving this, that our product became very nervous, but as if that Wi-Fi was not enough, she put a letter in the melons, approaching the protagonist so that he could grab it, since in doing so he committed the protagonist to have an appointment the next day, the same day that the appointment with Toki was scheduled. But just in case that was not enough, there after a while Origami called the protagonist to meet him the next day, since he had something important to tell him. And so with this the protagonist will have 3 appointments in one day, being that the first one began with touching who he left to the aquarium, but since the time was getting closer when he was supposed to meet Toki, he faked a stomach ache to leave and be in time to receive Toki, whom at the request of his sister and the rest of the crazy people ended up inviting him to a lingerie store, where the girl, neither short nor lazy, began to try on very craving underwear. But in that the protagonist had to run away, since the time had come to meet his third Origami date of the day with her. He went to eat, but note that it happened looking for him, so he went to see her before she found him with Origami, so he was sharing all his time with each one like the womanizer himself. In one of those, while he was playing, he sat alone on a bench waiting for the protagonist to free himself from being seeing the other girls. She noticed that to one side of her there were some guys stoning an innocent kitten, so she approached them to lecture them, but we did not see how she did it, because before the condemned woman turned off the security cameras with which they were filming on the other, and Origami collided with Taka, being that there is one told the other that she was on a date with the protagonist, being that obviously the one called the other a liar, since each one believes that she is the only one who is dating him. Kid, but hey, we know that they are both right in that they are dating the main character, who, by the way, is not with either of them at that moment, because it was having a touch. But when he got to the bench where he had left her, he realizes that the girl escaped, and when he went into the forest to look for her, he realizes that there is blood and body parts scattered in the place where he was also found, pointing to the only cat abuser kid left alive. Well, to the others he does the madre, and well, against the latter he did the same as before the scene. The protagonist was super shocked to see the way in which the girl ends so many kids without mercy, since now it seemed that it would be the protagonist's turn, but that's exactly what he appeared. His sister man in a Fatra plan to save him, and after this he was killed by touch again, and I say again because he did it before too, but after a while he reappeared to touch alive. So with Toki you never know if he died or not, and yes, the same mana gave him. The protagonist confesses that Tokio is a spirit whose main ability is to reappear in another place after his death, so she is willing to follow her mother every time she reappears to see if she ever dies definitively. Later on, to whom he tells what happened with Toki, and says he is a little sad that the waifu is killed all the time. He will make Toki stop being a threat to the planet, and with that they would avoid killing her all the time, because in one of the most possible thing is that she stops reviving and stays in the other world, since that's when she gives him permission to dominate her as he did with her. That the next day we see that the touch has already appeared. Now his life is on the roof of the school, where he transforms into an evil spirit, spreads a black aura throughout the place, which made those who were left under the effects of the shadow fatigued, and in that Tokio calls on the protagonist to attend the roof, to which the protagonist leaves immediately, and there he confesses that the barrier that you have created is extracting vital energy from people to give it to her, since she must do that from time to time to be able to use his powers. However, he says that if he reaches commercial prota, that thanks to the power of the script, he has something that all spirits want to consume energy from other people, it will no longer be necessary, and good as he is important to Toki, since without him he could not reach his state of perfection. He threatens to take his own life if she does not remove the barrier, and the threat is only to say because the condemned man fulfilled his threat by throwing it on the roof. But of course Touch saved him since he needs him alive to be able to do what he wants to do. And there he also agrees to the request of the protagonist to remove the barrier. After this the girl was already preparing to eat the protagonist, but there came Mana to rip off his arm. However, on this occasion the result of their fight was going to be different, because the Touch was more powerful after absorbing the energy of the people of the school, so he beat up the poor human being that in that Touch, and Origami arrived as reinforcements, and the problem is that it touches he summoned all his versions from different timelines. And of course now the situation looks very complicated. In fact, Toki was going to send them all flying with a gigantic black ball, but that's when the least thoughtful heroine appeared to save them. Yes people, it's about Kotori, who turns out to be able to now, is well broken, and it doesn't matter if they put 15 shots at her, including one of them, in the forehead, she is still able to get up to continue facing all the Tokis. Since after a while the Akatoria had managed to kill almost all, he only had one of the Tokis he had targeted, and if he killed Toki, he would cease to exist without resurrections. Hence, the Prota's pimp was to defend her precisely because Psycho Bull, and he shoots Toki he will die forever, and well we already know that the Prota doesn't. He is in favor of eliminating the spirits, he is more of making them part of his arena. After he received the impact Doki was able to escape manager Origami. They were also taken to the hospital, but they are out of danger, and the parrot is in one of the offices of the ship. Being that naturally, the protagonist went to visit her to ask her who the hell is she, or be that suddenly, it was so or it is not normal. So the protagonist wants an explanation to this. Parrot tells him that when she was born she was human, but that she suddenly underwent a transformation and became a spirit, to which the astonished protagonist asks which one it was the reason, but not the girl says that she does not know the reasons, that one day she simply became a spirit without understanding why. The only thing you know is that thanks to the fact that the protagonist was her brother, and he was always with her, she was able to control her powers to not to harm the people of the earth, and from there he made the decision to use the protagonist to save other spirits who were going through the same situation. However, when he saw the situation in which the protagonist was found, Koteri ended up releasing the 100% of his powers, so now he says that he must seal them again, being that to achieve this the protagonist must do the same thing he did with Yoshi with a touch, but this time with her, which is to invite her to a date, and make her his own sister falls in love with him. I know people, this is very shady, and even the same parrot, and knows it. That's why she almost fainted, or well it wasn't for that people. The reason almost fainting is that since now the girl released 100% of his powers, his body is beginning to suffer the consequences, so the protagonist must yes make the appointment. But before the protagonist went to the hospital to visit the other girls who were injured, being that in one of those he found Origami, which in reality, she was already fine. But when she saw that the protagonist was going to visit other girls, she killed herself so that the protagonist would take care of. And with that excuse she made the Sprout accompany her to her bed, where she got a little hot. But hey, we're not here for dirty things. The fact is that after Origami got hot, she asked the protagonist who he was, and that spirit of fire that burst into the middle of the battle against Toki, because she couldn't see who it was, since after a while he fainted. And well, the protagonist does not want to tell him that this spirit was his Kotori sister. However, Origami says that this spirit of fire was responsible for his parents burning to death, so from that moment on he decided to join the Legion of Spirit Hunters, all the intention of finding the spirit of fire and killing her in revenge for what she did to her parents. And of course, after finding out about all this, the protagonist is a little sad, because he will have to make a difficult decision. But before that she went shopping with her two girls, when her third Vifu appeared in the store, who asked Koda if she managed to see who the spirit of fire was, because well, as we already know, she wants to go find her to send her flying, but Origami asked her to the wrong person, since of all fees he is the one who loves her the least, so he does not reveal the identity of the spirit of fire, among other things, because she does not know that it is about Kotori either. All the girls that were in the fight fainted before see that the spirit of fire was Kotori so good, since they could not move forward on the subject of the spirit of fire. The girls decided to compete for good who found the best swimsuits, being that naturally they chose the protagonist as a judge, and well, he passed it quite uncomfortable because the girls were showing him to the point that in one of those, so this was enough for him, and he decided to leave the swimsuit competition. Instead he went to see the video of when his sister Kotori turned in the spirit of fire for the first time, and with the intention of seeing how he did on that occasion to seal his powers, since that is an event that he does not remember. However, while he is watching the video he notices that there is a strange stain on the recording that seems to be a third person apart from him and his sister, but before I could identify her, the kid passed out. So good to prevent the kid from passing out from trying to watch the video again, they decided that he better use the conventional method to seal the powers of his sister, and that method is by having a date with her. That's why we see her arrive to meet the protagonist, and the two of them go to a pool together, but of course they didn't go alone. The kid has a harem that he can't leave behind, so that's why we see that Yoshi plays are also in the pool, so the appointment is for the protagonist with 3 girls in one of those parrot. He had to leave the appointment briefly to go since he is having pain as a result of having recovered his powers from there, that he was his assistant to inject him with something to ease the pain, who warns that if he doesn't seal his powers tomorrow he will end up unleashing them and he will become uncontrollable. And well, it turns out that this conversation was overheard by the protagonist, who didn't know that his sister had so little time left, but the assistant tells him that Kotori did not want him to find out, since if he had done it he would have had the date out of pity, and she did not want that, so the assistant asks the protagonist to pretend he did not hear anything, and to continue with the normal appointment. To this the protagonist accepted, but also when he met Kotori again he took off his hearing aid to stop following instructions, because if he is going to have a normal appointment he will do it, so tell him what to do on the other, and Origami is investigating inside the army of hunters about the identity of the spirit of fire, being that in one of those it occurred to him to request access to the video of his last battle, and in that he was able to realize that the spirit of fire is Kotori. For his part, both Yoshi and Touch, they found out that Kotori is the one with fire, and that the protagonist seeks to seal her powers. So as Kotori, she was responsible for the project that made them now able to be on Earth without problems. They say that they owe her a lot, so they plan to help her, but well, he detail is that these girls are far from where Parrot is currently in the main character, so they couldn't prevent Origami from launching that attack, with which he made Kotori disappear. But it's okay people, that if Parrot disappeared from the bench it's because they were flown in order to dodge the attack. That's why we see him and like a Fachero telling Origami that he doesn't intend to let himself be killed, after which the spirit of fire transforms, and begins to distribute the madrazos to the Origami. However, the Origami came prepared with his military technology, so he manages to make good opposition to Kotori. However, in one of those parrots, he managed to knock down Origami, but when he was about to kill her she told him that her parents died because of her, so that is the reason for their fight. Being that upon hearing this, Kotori was astonished, since she did not know what had caused the death of Origami's parents. And well, this drop of guard was used by Origami to capture Kotori, but in that the protagonist stepped through to prevent his sister from being taken off, who tells Origami that his revenge is against the spirit of fire, not against his younger sister. But well, Origami tells him that his younger sister is the spirit of fire, so it is the same as this. The protagonist wants to make Origami understand, and that his sister was possessed, and that he was able to see the real spirit that possessed her in a video, so all they have to do is drive the spirit away from his sister, and that's it. But nothing Origami, they don't believe those, so he's still thinking of ripping it off. Just that in that Yoshi intervened in defense of the protocol Ori. This was taken advantage of by the protagonist to take Kotori to a remote place where he ended up kissing her, thus managing to seal his powers. After which the girl fainted, and the protagonist sought to shelter her in a safe place. The problem is that in that Origami launched an attack, which the protagonist managed to heal, and that was so because after the kiss the protagonist became the spirit of fire, so he tells him that if he wants to take revenge who should he kill. Now it's him, but nothing in the end. Origami did not have the courage to do it so well. Sometime later we see that Kotori could be human again, and that the protagonist went to kiss Taka for having helped him, but in that Yoshi's puppet was crossed, where Yoshi tells us that the story will continue. And if you want this summary to continue, leave me the word spirit in the comments, and with that I'll get to work to bring a second part of this summary.